What's going on, everybody? This is Chris, and you're listening to the Underground Ministry Podcast, where new and different ideas are both accepted and encouraged. This is an outlet for me to unpack my ideas about the gospel, Christianity, and the world around us in such a way that I can share it and hopefully encourage somebody in the process. I've been finishing up school. I've completed the requirements for a master's in ministry at Wesley Seminary. And so, pretty stoked about that. Also, pretty stoked about where the next step in my educational journey will be happening. I'm not sure of that yet. I'm planning to re enroll in classes in the fall of 2024 in order to complete a master's in divinity. And so that's sort of what's going on with me and sort of why I haven't recorded in a while. I've been finishing that up and kind of getting some rest. But a lot has happened during that time. But I'm excited because I'm going to get to talk about Taylor Swift today, so that's cool. Conservative evangelicalism has given me the opportunity to talk about Taylor Swift on my podcast, so that's pretty sweet because Taylor Swift is awesome, and so there's something going on that is relevant to ministry concerning Taylor Swift. So pretty stoked about that. And going to kind of unpack some things about why maybe conservative evangelicals might not be so happy about the summer that Taylor Swift is having. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court and some of the Supreme Court rulings and sort of how they affect ministry and how we should respond to some of these rulings as Christians. But before I get to that, the Trump indictment, man, happened since the last podcast that I recorded. And like when it happened, I was really, really excited, I think would be the right word, to record a podcast, basically like pumping my fist and getting all excited about the fact that finally Donald Trump had been indicted for some of the stuff that it looked like he was probably going to be charged and was going to have at least 25 years in prison, like coming down the pike for him. And so I was all excited, and then I was like, why am I excited? I was listening to some other podcasts and some other people get really, really excited about the fact that Donald Trump had been indicted for these charges concerning some classified documents that he had in his bathroom. And so they weren't secured. They weren't supposed to be in his possession anyway. He pleaded not guilty to 37 charges of alleged mishandling of classified documents. And so there's going to be a trial. He's going to have his day in court. Things aren't looking good. And so, like, the, let's just say it, the liberal Christian in me was like, yes, this is finally going to, see his day and what have you. But then, like, I started thinking about it. I was like, why am I so excited about somebody possibly being incarcerated? When I've on this podcast and in my preaching and things of that nature have talked about setting free the captives. And I have my own issues with the criminal justice system and our prison system and so on and so forth. And I don't want anybody to serve a life sentence. I want, for the most part, if anything, for somebody to learn their lesson and then be re-entered into society a better person for it, right? And so, like, I don't want Donald Trump to spend the rest of his life in prison. I want him to just stop being a jerk. and and so there's elements of this that are conflicting for me because yes, I think that that he, if this is the way to stop the madness, as it were, then awesome. But also, like, I don't want anybody to suffer if it's not necessary, right? Now, there's a sense in which, like, having these documents and who saw them and who might have seen them, can be dangerous to us, to our national security, and so on and so forth. And so, like, those things are going to be fleshed out in court. And if those things come up, then maybe, we do have to think about what the consequences for that are. But if he simply had some papers he wasn't supposed to have. Um, you know, I think like let's make sure he's not president again. Like I think that's a good idea. But like the fact that he might serve the rest of his life in jail for something that seems pretty, I don't want to say innocent, but like not detrimental to society. Let's just make sure it doesn't happen again, right? Um, but like that wasn't the attitude of a lot of people who view the world the way that I do. It was mostly, like I said, cheering and jeering and excitement over the fact that he finally had been indicted and that it looks as if he's probably going to spend some time in jail. And so yeah, that for me was conflicting, which maybe a surprise to some people, but um, yeah, I wasn't as excited maybe as some other people were, and I really took a attitude of empathy towards the whole situation because, like I said, I don't want anyone to spend the rest of their life in a jail cell if it's not necessary. So hopefully, this is the best case scenario from my perspective is that he uh, stops, like I said, stops being a jerk, but doesn't have to spend the rest of his life in jail. Fair. So uh, that was interesting to say the least for me to not be as excited as maybe I thought I would be about something like that. So maybe in some ways I'm growing. I don't know, but that's how that sat with me. And so I ended up not doing a whole podcast on the Trump indictment and instead introed with, uh, for this podcast, a message of empathy for people that I disagree with and loving those who have a different point of view than I do. Like, for instance, if I was in front of Donald Trump right now, like, all I would really do is say, hey, man, stop being a jerk and try to convince him that, like, everybody's worth loving and that, like, not everybody is an enemy or is trying to, like, destroy your life. And really, most people just want you to stop. We can stop being a jerk. And we can probably get along if you were to do that. And I don't know how you'd respond to that. Probably not positively, but who knows? Uh, you bring peace, and if they don't respond with peace, you shake the dust off and move on. And so that would probably be where we would come to. It was some form of shaking the dust off. But anyway, so that was sort of how I wanted to intro today was with this um, conflict that I had internally about the Trump indictment. I said I was going to talk about Taylor Swift. Um, Taylor Swift, man, is having the summer of her life. And in turn, like people who are Taylor Swift fans are having the summer of their lives. This Eras tour has blown up. Um, she is on tour um, and sometimes multiple nights in one city, sold out shows, astronomical ticket prices. Uh, this particular tour, I'm told, will propel her over being a billionaire. So, having a really, really good summer. Just released a re-recording of the Speak Now album, which she's doing re-recordings of in order to regain creative control of her own content. Some songs she's rewriting the lyrics to when she re-releases them for various reasons. And so, just all around, Taylor Swift's having a great summer. Has a lot of influence, has a lot of money, and in some sense has a lot of power, right? Because with this kind of influence, you have the power to manipulate people in different directions with what you say and what you do, right? So naturally, there is groups of people who are saying that it is possible, in fact, very, very likely, that Taylor Swift is the Antichrist, right? because of course she is. Of course Taylor Swift is the Antichrist. Of course, because Taylor Swift is a powerful woman with lots of money and lots of influence who is not married, so has nobody to submit to, um, must have made some kind of deal with the devil in order to experience the success she's experiencing. There's no possible way that she simply could just be that talented, passionate, attractive, and influential on her own. Women can't do that, right? And I hope you sense my sarcasm. But that is the response that all of this is garnered. It's not possible for us to just allow people to have power, influence, money, all these things without somebody saying that's no good. We want our children to stay away from that. So certain types of people, mostly conservative evangelical Christians, will try to find some way to turn Taylor Swift into the devil so that parents will keep their children from engaging with her content. Maybe she loses some of her power and influence. Probably not going to happen anytime soon. But, it would be the Christian position to not listen to Taylor Swift anymore and, not go to her concerts. And if you're letting your kids go to Taylor Swift concerts, you're not a good parent, and that sort of narrative gets drawn out because it's important that we make sure that people like Taylor Swift don't have power and influence over people, especially when you carry some liberal or woke beliefs with you into these concerts. We can't have our children following that, right? So, yeah, that's what's happened. So now Taylor Swift's the Antichrist. Next week it'll be Kanye again or whomever, but this week it's Taylor Swift, and I think it's because she's a woman with power, money, and influence, and we have to, as Christians, make sure that that doesn't continue to take place because we need conservative, straight white men to be those who are in power and with influence. And if that's not the case, we've got to do everything we can to defame people who hold those positions. So this week it's Taylor Swift. Next week, again, it might be Beyonce again or Kanye, or I've heard Jay-Z before because supposedly they do some kind of devil worship during his concerts. Travis Scott, who I think is having some legal troubles of his own. I'm not going to speak too far into that because I've not done enough research. Maybe that's another podcast for another day. But yeah, this week the Antichrist is Taylor Swift. So as a part of getting into the reasoning for this, another thing that I saw since the last time I've recorded, I watched the Shiny Happy People documentary about the IBLP and the Duggar family who have been spokespeople and sort of the face of the IBLP. And I believe the Duggar man now is like the leader of the IBLP because the guy that was came under some more scrutiny and what have you. And so as a result of this, like there was a lot of people that were speaking out against the IBLP, and so like last week I saw this graphic that was in this documentary, right, of this umbrella theology, this umbrella of authority that the IBLP promotes, which at the top there is the umbrella of Christ, who has the authority to forgive sins, and according to them, this authority is passed down to the pastors, right? So the next umbrella underneath, so there's 4 umbrellas. The top umbrella is Christ. The next umbrella is obviously the pastors, right? And the pastors have authority over everybody underneath. And so the pastor's authority is to protect the church and oversee the husbands. So don't oversee everybody, just the husbands. If you're a man that's not married, you don't get overseen. If you are a woman at all, wife or not, you're not being overseen by the pastor. Just the husbands are overseen by the pastors. The next, obviously, part of this umbrella is the husband. And the husband's job is to protect the family and provide for the family. Okay, I can more or less get down with that. I think as a parent, the job is to protect the family, provide for the family, husband or wife. But it doesn't mean that that's not the job of the husband, right? So far, that part of the umbrella probably is the one that I don't have that much problem with. But then to have the authority over the wife, which is the bottom, the bottom umbrella is this wife umbrella, and the wife's only job is to take care of the children and be managers of the home, which means that the husband is not a manager of the home, but also like she has no responsibility for protecting or providing. So she doesn't need a job and she doesn't need to protect the family. So this is this umbrella. And so, of course, like I said, Taylor Swift, being a single woman, has no umbrella of authority over her because there's no husband to lord over her for her to be submissive to. So, of course, she probably is the Antichrist, because how in the world is she gaining all this power and influence without having a husband or a pastor, which I'm assuming she has a pastor. She is a Christian, for all intents and purposes. But and Christ is probably Lord of her life too, being a Christian. So, but because she doesn't have a husband, there's like a disconnect in this like part of authority or whatever that has to happen. But yeah, this singles out single people, or makes them feel as if they don't really belong in the church at all. And anyway, so this started coming out, and I was like, hey, when I saw other people posting this, I made sure to say, hey, there's problems with this. As a pastor, as public theologian, as I think I talked about in another podcast, another video, I feel as though there are times when it's appropriate for me to step in and voice concerns over bad theology. And this was one, and I basically said, hey, look this up. I'll help you maybe understand why this is not good. It could be damaging to some people. And I didn't say a whole lot of reasons why. Kind of left it there. Just say, hey, look up the IBLP, watch Shiny Happy People if you want to. If you need more information, but look up why this is damaging and find out for yourself, right? Of course, then people start coming and says, no, this is actually biblical, and this, that, and the other. Paul says that, women should be submissive to their husbands, and so on and so forth. And one of my responses was great, and it was actually one I hadn't prepared. First of all, keep reading to see that in Ephesians, Paul also tells the husband to give his life for his wife, just as Christ gave his life for the church. So there's a element of mutual submission, which is what Paul is talking about in this passage. But also, Paul wasn't married, and in our society, we usually want to have people who are experts or who have at least experienced the thing before we take advice from them on something. And so why is it that Paul's writings about marriage are somehow inerrant? I'm not sure, unless he's talking about something else. Unless he's not talking about marriage, he's talking about this attitude of mutual submission to each other, which should be throughout the church. That makes a lot more sense. That makes a lot more sense than whatever it is this umbrella thing looks like. So anyway, but that was sort of my response to that. If you need to look up, IBLP umbrella of authority to see what I'm talking about, there's multiple different graphics, but they're all pretty much the same, where they have this order of authority that is displayed in this graphic. And so that's patriarchy, right? That's where it comes from, and this is a cool graphic that gets shown in a lot of churches, and we assume that because it gets shown in a lot of churches that it must be biblical because my pastor showed me, and of course the pastor has authority over everybody, and so that's they have to listen and just assume that that's biblical, right? As a pastor, I wish it worked that way, but I don't believe it works that way, and I don't really want it to work that way. I don't want to have this like authority over people that I pastor. I want to be mutually submissive to the people that I pastor, so that we can model this behavior that Christ calls us to. Amen. So, and obviously that's hard for me in some ways because I am a straight white male who is a pastor, and so in some ways, like my existing feeds into this belief. However, as that, I also find some responsibility to debunk or deconstruct. Oops, sorry, deconstruct this kind of theology if and when I can. Lastly, Supreme Court decisions came down. Several of them I want to talk about. One being the student debt relief. Just briefly, we talked about student debt relief on this podcast, I think, before. The biblical position is that every 7 years, all debt should be forgiven. Okay, so if you want to take a biblical position on student debt relief, you'd say, yeah, it's been long overdue. Okay, and so any other position isn't biblical, and I hope we can all move on from that. But the student debt relief program, or the student debt relief proposal, got shot down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional. And so there you have it. Now we can have another discussion about whether or not it's constitutional. But if we're going to take a Christian position on student debt relief, it's that, or biblical position on student debt relief, it's that all debt should be forgiven every 7 years, and full stop. A good decision that came down was the one over the Biden immigration program or whatever policies. They remain in place, so that was a good decision that came down. The one that was probably, there's two that were most polarizing, I guess, were the ones about affirmative action and these marriage websites that this person wanted to make, but not for certain types of people. So we'll talk about that one first because I have a follow-up and probably want to talk longer about the affirmative action case. But according to the Supreme Court, it is a part of businesses' free speech rights to not create or serve or whatever LGBTQ people. In this case specifically, there was a website designer who was going to be designing marriage websites, and but did not want to have to do so for gay marriages or queer marriages of any kind. Nobody asked this person to. They claimed to have. The person that is supposedly on the other side of this court case either doesn't exist, or they found the person and found out that he was a straight white male who never asked them for this. So there was no face, no name to the defendant, or as it were, and so no empathy, no story, no face for these people because they didn't exist. So this hypothetical situation of somebody asking somebody to make a website who had an LLC, who's a business. Okay, it's not your personal speech; it's the speech of the business or the workings of the business. Were never asked to make a website for LGBTQ people in any way. they decided to take this case all the way to the Supreme Court. Why not? Because what's better than just spitting in the wind different rulings about excluding people? Um, so this goes all the way to Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, no, you don't have to make, as a business, you don't have to serve these types of people. Now, the problem with this is the problem there was with not serving African Americans in a restaurant at certain times, or only serving certain types of people at a store. Okay, this is unconstitutional to the nth degree. Okay, if you own a business, you have a LLC and are a business working under all the protections of American business, you are required to serve whoever comes into your store, business, whatever. Okay, no matter their race, religion, ethnicity, or gender, or sexual preference. Okay, that's I believe that's the 14th Amendment. And so I'm not really sure how this violates this individual's freedom of speech, because they're operating as a business. And so in this case, though the Supreme Court ruled that they are free to turn away whoever they want to for their website business. And so this could get ugly and slippery really fast, because like I said, this could turn into, I don't have to serve you food. I don't have to let you into my store. I don't have to, I can turn you away in any type of business because of what you look like, what you act like, what you believe in, or who you're holding hands with when you come in. And that's obviously unconstitutional. So hopefully there'll be a case soon that reverses this. And we're going to take a biblical position. Jesus calls us to welcome the stranger, welcome all who come into you. Come with peace, bring peace wherever you go, and to love all people. And so, like, if you don't want to make a website, you can just operate independently. Don't use an LLC. Don't run as a business. Just operate independently. Freelance, your websites or whatever, and then you can do whatever work for whoever you want to do it for. But if you're going to be an American business, you have to, according to the law, serve all people that ask you for your business. So, but anyway, lastly was the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action. So supposedly now it is unconstitutional to ask somebody or to give anybody, say, preferential treatment because of their race, right? And of course, some people would say, well, that's what racism is, when you treat somebody differently because of their skin color or whatever, right? However, the purpose of affirmative action was not to discriminate against white people, but to give opportunities to people of color who would otherwise not have those opportunities, whether that be through scholarships, whether that be through admissions, what have you. And so this ruling, while it's going to eventually force us to find better ways to help people who need it, it's unconstitutional in and of itself as well, because it, again, keeps us from being able to help people who have traditionally been marginalized, oppressed, and have been placed behind the eight ball, as it were, in life because of their skin color. Okay? What this will reaffirm, and what will end up happening, is that people with the most money and resources and financial backing will be the ones who get into colleges, because what are colleges except for money-making factories? And of course, there's levels to all of these rulings, right? Because there's a student debt relief bit that's supposed to help students and people who are in debt. Well, the people who are in debt are the people that take out loans. The people that take out loans are people who don't already have the money, and the people who don't already have the money in America are generally speaking minorities. So you kind of getting double screwed. You're saying, hey, you know, yeah, you got to pay back all your debt, and you know what? You might not still have the opportunities you used to have because we're pretty much doing away with affirmative action. I was really, really proud of my denomination, which, as you can see, is the United Methodist Church. If you're watching the video, if not, I am a United Methodist Church pastor, a candidate for ministry in the United Methodist Church, and they released a statement that said today's Supreme Court decision ruling unconstitutional, the use of affirmative action is anti-ethical to the social teachings of the United Methodist Church. Most fundamental premise underlying the concept of affirmative action is both moral and spiritual. According to biblical teaching, we are mandated in the face of inhumane discrimination, whether that discrimination is intended or unintended, to do what we can to redress legitimate grievances and to create a society in which the lives of each and all will flourish. And I said, heck yeah. Personally, I'm on the committee, a member of the Religion and Race Committee of the United Methodist Church. And that exists to be able to protect pastors and lay people who want to or feel the need to or are moved by the Spirit to speak out against racism. The Religion and Race Committee exists to protect those people. And so that's something that I am a part of and that I appreciate very much, and that it even exists, right? And so they, along with the General Board of Higher Education and others, jointly released this statement, basically in support of affirmative action and express their displeasure with the Supreme Court ruling. And so kudos to the United Methodist Church and their stance as it pertains to affirmative action. But yeah, so as I wrap up, let me kind of wrap everything that I've said into a bow, because I know that's been a lot. And I also know that there were a lot of things that have happened, and hopefully, and I've said a lot. And but I want to wrap this up in a sense that I want to say that empathy is cool when it comes to people who are being indicted for charges that may cost them a life sentence. And that in my gut, it just wasn't in me to celebrate. Taylor Swift is not the Antichrist simply for being a woman with power and authority. The IBLP umbrella of authority graphic is full of crap. We should welcome and serve all types of people in our businesses and in our lives and in our churches and so on and so forth. And affirmative action was put in place in order to help people who were and have been traditionally behind the eight ball as it pertains to admission to colleges and so on and so forth. And so I personally, and the denomination that I'm a part of, is in disagreement with the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action. But that's it. I'm now, I think, caught up on life, on quote-unquote politics, and the ways in which that I believe as people of faith we should interact with these topics. So, if I think that's all I've got, and if so, I just want to remind everybody that I love you, and God loves you too. Peace.